The Empress Returns, by Iowa Forever. Chapter 1.23, Pride of the Lion. Matthias had maneuvered the Sanguinium martyrs to a flanking position alongside the Empress flagship. With inquisitional armaments it might have stood a chance against one of the Astartes ships, it could do little against several dozen of them supported by the most powerful mobile fortress in the Imperial arsenal, so it would be best to take up a supporting position or at least one where they could dart forward for a glorious sacrifice so the Empress might survive. Open comms, he said to his communication officer. There was a pause before the connection broke through. Empress, this is Inquisitor Matthias. Inquisitor, the Empress said. Have you alerted your Deathwatch teams to the situation? They are focused on the last of the Greenskins, Empress, Matthias said. None of the assigned Marines are Dark Angels or successors, so we do not have to worry about a potential mutiny if this gets out of hand. Good, good. Keep close to us so that we do not lose communication, and I may like you to come aboard should this escalate further. Inquisitor Matthias. Another communications officer called. We're receiving a communication from the Rock. Matthias paused. The Dark Angels would not single out a single Inquisition ship, so it was most likely a general broadcast. That should go over well with the more trigger-happy members of our fleet. Put it through, he said. Let's see what the Dark Angels have to say. The communications officer nodded before keying in a response, static buzzing over the speakers before the communication began. To the fleet orbiting Caesarea, a deep, commanding voice said. I am the Lion, Primarch of the Dark Angels and loyal servants of the Imperium and the Emperor. Had we met on less dubious occasions I would congratulate you on your victory over the Greenskins, but I will refrain until the issue set before us is settled, that of your leader, the so-called Empress of Mankind. Nope, definitely won't go over well. My demands are simple, this Empress must come aboard the Rock, alone and unarmed, so that I may decide for myself if she really is the Emperor reborn. If she is who she claims she is, I will bend the knee and pledge the Dark Angels to your crusade. If she does not, we shall destroy your fleet and all who swear loyalty to the traitor. You have 24 hours to respond. Fail to respond by that time, and you will be fired upon. With that the message ceased. There was silence aboard the bridge of the Sanguinium martyrs, communications officers looking to Matthias for guidance. He said nothing before communication to the Empress flagship was resumed. Inquisitor Matthias, the Empress said. Empress. Bring your squad and cutter to my ship at once. Matthias had no chance to speak before the Empress terminated the call. Matthias' hand tightened, a vain attempt to release some of the tension left in his body. The cutter is ready for transit and your squad has been alerted, Lord Matthias, another officer said. Good. Matthias composed himself before turning. Let them know I'll be right down. In the meantime, keep all power in our shields and do not activate macro batteries unless the Dark Angels fire. Yes, Lord Matthias. Matthias continued on down the hall, hands still balled up. He had no time to grab his weapons or armor, and so would have to rely on other skills for now. Then, what skills can be used against a battle fleet commanded by a stubbornly loyal Primarch? Matthias spoke to no one until he stepped out into the hangar. The cutter had been prepared, Magos Errol's servitors loading the last of the machinery while his henchmen checked their weapons. Angelique was staring off into space, perhaps observing the Dark Angels through some psychic power, and said nothing until Matthias drew close. The lion roars as the eye gathers below the petals of the flower, Angelique said. The mare plucks the thorns away, so they may see themselves truly. We heard about the fleet, Nikolai said as he plugged the power pack into his hellgun. Are we coordinating with the Empress? Yes and no, Matthias said. Lionel Janssen himself has delivered an ultimatum, the Empress speaks with him, or he blows the entire fleet to scrap metal. The bite of the lion is strong, the slash of the raven clean, Angelique said. I had read stories of the Dark Angels Primarch being a bit blunt, Alexis said. Pray hope that the Empress might be able to temper him. I'm sure she will, but that is not for us to decide. Matthias brushed past his henchmen and onto the cutter. My guess is that the Empress will use this vessel to head to the Parley. Let's just hope the pilot interface is compatible with her powers, or it will be a short journey for all of us. Well, we'll be here to steer her straight, Alexis said, smiling. His smile faded as the realization came over him. Unless the Empress is going alone. As per the Dark Angel's commands, if she does decide to parley, Matthias sighed. Had I more foresight I would have arranged a little more contact with the Western Imperium, so we could better understand the Dark Angels in these hours. I guess we just have to rely on our own intuition. And hellguns, if things go to the warp quicker than we think, Alexis said. Matthias sighed, but at least the Valhallan was keeping his spirits up somewhat. I do not think it will come to that, but we must be prepared for everything. Matthias replied. Come, we have tarried here long enough. Twilight and the sisters had hurried down to the hangar after they had finished with her armor, deftly dodging through crowds of crewmen and soldiers as they prepared for possible action against the Dark Angels. Moving in the armor was much easier than Twilight had thought it would be, especially once she had gotten her undersuit on, and she found herself darting through the halls at a pace that would have put her preconditioning self to shame. She might have given Applejack or Rainbow Dash a run for her money, but that could be considered wishful thinking. Their journey took several minutes of darting and diving through the halls before they finally came to the main hangar. Around Twilight, fighters and bombers were loaded up with weaponry in preparation for a possible attack, hundreds of missiles and bombs arrayed around her while servitors prepared their warheads. Celestia could not be seen, though she could make out the telltale silhouette of Matthias' cutter as it rested near the entrance to the hangar. That's probably where Celestia will be. Come on, girls. She called. We might make it to the Empress in time before things get further out of hand. The sisters nodded and followed after Twilight, armor rattling as they kept their pace. Most of the crewmen and servitors preparing the attack aircraft were swift to part for the sororitas and Twilight, but a few suffering from brain locking needed a bit more encouragement before one of the sisters trampled it in their rush to find the Empress. Another minute of running, and Twilight spotted Celestia standing before the cutter. Corax and several custodes were on her left, the Primarch looking a bit more cross than usual, while Matthias and his group stood to Celestia's right, discussing something Twilight could not hear. Twilight slowed her pace before calling. Empress. Terra. Celestia looked back for a brief instant before turning her attention back to the cutter. I do not remember calling you down here. Some of the officers said this is where you'd be, so I came here to help, Twilight said, pausing to catch her breath before speaking. I haven't heard much else, though. Will the Dark Angels attack? Unlikely as of now, Corax said. The Lion was many things, but he was never one to engage an enemy without proper scouting beforehand, though I do not agree with the Empress giving in to his demands so easily. If it means that we are spared pointless bloodshed, so be it. Celestia replied. What demands? Twilight asked. The Dark Angels have requested an audience with the Empress aboard their fortress, Matthias explained. Unfortunately for us, that audience is the Empress alone and unarmed. Twilight held back a small gasp. That seems needlessly paranoid. That sentence is quite fitting concerning the Dark Angels, but that's not the point. Matthias turned to the Empress. With all due respect, Your Majesty, stepping onto the rock alone and defenseless is far too risky. If the Dark Angels are deployed for war, they could very well use it as an attempt to capture or assassinate you without further resistance. While I appreciate your concern, you are still approaching this as if I were a normal diplomat. Celestia shook her head. I have been absent for 15 millennia, but I still trust the Lion will not raise his blade against the fleet unless he is completely certain it is a battle worth fighting. Corax opened his mouth to speak, but Celestia shot him a short glare. That requires full confidence on both sides, Corax. Even with your ability to remain unseen, there is too much risk if you are discovered before I can talk the Dark Angels down, should you choose to accompany me. I must go alone. As you say, Empress. Corax muttered, turning away as Celestia looked to Matthias. Your cutter is ready for transit? Matthias gave a short nod of affirmation. Good. I shall return once I am finished. Terra? Yes, Empress? Twilight asked, rocking on her feet. Keep an eye on the fleet. Perhaps this is a time when a less warlike approach is needed. Twilight blinked a few times, her eyes darting between Celestia, Corax, and Matthias for any sign of relief. Sensing none, she merely gave a short nod. I'll do my best, she said. That is all we can ask for. Celestia replied. You know your duties, see to it that they are carried out. With that, Celestia strode onto the cutter, the door closing behind her and leaving the others waiting outside. Corax was already moving off through the hangar, leaving behind Twilight, Matthias, his squad, and the sisters. Orders, Terra? Sister Naomi asked from behind her. The Empress just asked me to keep an eye on the fleet, not command it, Twilight said, stepping to the side slightly so she could face both Matthias and his group and the sisters. I doubt Corax will start a fight, but I should probably stick close to him in case he has any further concerns, any more concerns than usual. No doubt a wise course of action. I will be here in the event that you need me. Matthias paused for a moment as he regarded Twilight. New armor? Yes, Twilight looked down at herself. The Empress wanted me to stay protected in the event I get into trouble like last time. Fitting. Matthias nodded. Should all go well with the Dark Angels, perhaps it will help to endear you to them once they are worked into the fleet. Celestia had shed her armor, adjusting the sleeve of her dress uniform as she waited for the cutter to dock aboard the Rock. The Dark Angels had respected the ceasefire, allowing her to travel under her own power for at least part of the last leg of her journey. How they would deal with her once she arrived, though, would remain to be seen. And there was always the concern that one commander of either fleet might get it into their head to do something rash. The cutter gave a small shake as it finally docked, Celestia rising to her feet as she walked towards the main entrance. She paused only to regard her armor, allowing a small part of her power to cloak it from view. That task complete, she continued on towards the door, taking a small breath before opening it to the outside. She was not even surprised to find almost an entire company's worth of Terminators waiting for her. "Is this what has become of the First Legion?" she asked, eyeing the massed ranks of white-clad Marines before her. "Have you grown so paranoid that one person requires most of your strength to subdue?" The Deathwing did not answer her, barely wavering in their resolve to stare her down. "At least that is commendable." Celestia said nothing more as a blue-clad Astartes stepped forward, the librarian eyeing her up and down for a moment. "So you are the one who claims to be the Emperor Reborn?" the Astartes said. "Yes, I am she," Celestia replied. "I understand that tensions are high, so please escort me to the Lion so that I may prove my identity as the master of mankind." There was a pause, the Dark Angels looking to one another before Celestia spoke again. "Is something the matter?" "No matter," the librarian said. "Come, the Primarch is expecting you." Celestia nodded, stepping into the hangar as the Deathwing Marines formed up behind her. She remained silent, keeping her eyes ahead so as to avoid drawing further suspicion from the Dark Angels. The caverns of the Rock appeared unchanged, sweeping upward into darkness as Celestia and her escort moved further. It was far quieter than expected, with only the sound of boots against rock and ceramite echoing through the caverns. Celestia did not mind if anything, it was a relief from the cacophony of religious hymns and machinery that filled her ships during the current crusade. In time, they would be silenced as well, but only when the Imperium was willing to accept her lack of divinity. As she mused on the thought, she felt something shift to her side. A void, almost, gliding through the ranks of the Terminators as it drew closer to her. She allowed only a side glance as a little figure dressed in green robes stepped from the shadows, the creature gliding up to her side as she walked. It made no noise, even its feet silent against the ground, and while the psychic void prevented her from truly seeing it for what it was, she could feel that the creature was watching her and several more of its fellows that glided past, some moving to join the first alongside Celestia. An odd escort, but then Celestia had learned to avoid dismissing such omens. "The Watchers draw close to you," the librarian said from ahead. "Do not consider it a sign of favor, for they often draw close to those who may yet present a threat." "Oh, you have no idea," Celestia thought, but she remained silent as the Watchers of the Dark continued to escort her. As they walked, Celestia could hear new sounds. Not that of machinery or Astartes, but voices. Screams. Cries for mercy that would never be answered. The effect had, perhaps, been enhanced by her psychic powers, the walls themselves resonating the sound to her as she walked along. She would have peered further, but the effect grew stronger the further in they ventured, and the nulling void of the Watchers was one that she did not intend to test. Interned on the throne, she had often searched for an answer to the Dark Angel's actions. Now, she had full proof of what happened within the darkened halls of the Rock. All that remained, perhaps, was the Lion. Celestia was eventually led to a grand door at the center of the fortress. The cries of torture had died down for now, Celestia recalling her power further to block them from her mind for a moment, aided by the small throng of Watchers that surrounded her. The Deathwing parted, the librarian stepping forward to speak with several more Astartes, one dressed in the armor of a chaplain while another stood with his own Watcher, eyeing Celestia as she waited. The conversation continued before the three disappeared into the room, leaving Celestia alone with her Watchers and Deathwing. The temptation to reach out and listen to the conversation held behind doors was great, but Celestia reined herself in again. She did not have to wait long before the Dark Angel leaders returned. "He will speak with you now. Do not leave him waiting." "You will not be joining us, then?" Celestia asked. The Dark Angels seemed more frustrated. The Lion insisted that he pass judgment in private. The chaplain said, "Now go." Celestia nodded, stepping past the Dark Angels and into the room. The Watchers followed after her, though only a few moved past the door and into the sanctuary. The door led to a large corridor, at the end of which stood a grand throne. It was stone, carved directly from the rock itself, inlaid with skulls and overseen by two great stone wings. 2 watchers stood before it, staring out at the door, and the hall itself was supported by statues, each one carved in the visage of every Dark Angel Grand Master that had fallen since the heresy. And standing near the base of one of the last was the Primarch himself, Lionel Johnson. Unlike Corax, ravaged by time and woe, Johnson appeared much as he had when Celestia had first met him. He was dressed in black armor adorned with silver icons of Caliban and the Imperium, clashing slightly with his blonde hair. He had his back to Celestia, hiding his face from her as he continued to inspect the statue before him. Celestia remained in place, holding her hands in front of her and waiting for the Primarch to speak. Some of the knightly orders of Caliban were much more reverent in glorifying their fallen champions, he said, still not turning to face Celestia. Warriors set within their armor, embalmed yet standing as if ready to join battle against the monsters that haunted the forests. I never truly cared for the practice, but I did understand at least some of the motive behind it. Veneration of the dead is often for the living's comfort, is it not? Celestia replied. I suppose that justifies why these fools allowed the Emperor to rot for 10,000 years. Johnson muttered. And look where that led them, 15,000 years of superstition and betrayal, blindly worshipping a man who was more like them than they care to realize. Johnson turned his head to cast a sideways glance at Celestia. 15,000 years, and you arrive to indulge them even more. Do you think I parade around as a god and bask in their admiration? Celestia snapped, finally stepping towards the Primarch. I would just as well have them cast aside these superstitions and place their faith into something real, but even I cannot undo 15,000 years of belief with a wave of my hand. You seem quite hesitant to change anything, though. Johnson turned away and walked further down the hall. You claim the throne of mankind, yet your overtures and battles pale in comparison to what I have seen, what you should have seen were you truly who you say you are. You are like a child stepping into the shoes of their father, trying to appear as they are and failing. Celestia furrowed her brow further. The legions are scattered, their primarchs either missing or dead, she said. I wish to restore the Imperium to its true glory, but all I have are scraps that must be worked with if they are to prove useful. Johnson said nothing as Celestia continued. And what of you? Why do you stand here judging me now? If I was some ordinary liar and traitor, why am I standing before you and not a firing squad? That is why you are here, is it not? Johnson asked. You have won many over, even Corax. I wanted to see for myself what drew them to you, the Empress of mankind. Celestia remained silent, doing her best to meet Johnson's eye, no small feat as he kept dodging away from her. So, Empress, what will you say now to ensure that I will not kill you as a traitor and a liar? He asked. You were always direct in such matters, Johnson. Celestia replied. In truth, there is nothing that I can say that will fully convince you that I am the Emperor, just in the body of a woman. Your first mistake. Why come back as a woman? There is nothing to be gained from it besides the perverse fantasies of some of the less noble among your forces. At this, Celestia scoffed. If they really did surrender to such drives, they would already be slaves to the ruinous powers, she said. I can see already that this is a waste of time. If you are going to accuse me of treason, do so now and be done with it. You set yourself up to die instead of trying to defend yourself? Johnson asked. What else do I have? My fleet cannot reach me, I am unarmed and outnumbered, and I realize that arguing with you will only delay the matter. Celestia drew herself up straight. So go on then, call me a liar. Call me a traitor. Draw your sword and strike me if you so desire, I won't stop you. I only ask that you look me in the eye as you pass judgment upon me. There was a long pause, Johnson regarding her for any signs of weakness. Finally, he spoke. Judgment, you and I are not the only ones seeking it, are we? Celestia said nothing as a hidden door behind Johnson opened. 2 Deathwing Terminators and a chaplain entered, the former dragging an unarmored man between them. Johnson stepped aside as the man was tossed to the floor at his feet, the 2 Terminators backing off as the Primarch continued. My sons have kept many secrets since the destruction of Caliban, Johnson continued. If you are truly who you say you are, then you may be privy to at least some of them. Celestia turned her attention to the man before her. While he may have been a mighty warrior in some past life, he appeared now as an emaciated old man with barely enough strength to kneel. Under his breath he murmured a string of words Celestia could not decipher. As she regarded the man, she allowed some of her composure to soften. Sar Luther, she said, loud enough to catch the prisoner's attention and cause him to fall silent. He was your mentor, your closest friend, until you cast him from your sight and set him on the road to betray you. The demands of the Great Crusade were for excellence, Johnson replied. Luther failed on Saroche, and I could not allow such failure to go unpunished. He saved your life. Celestia countered. Only after toying with the idea of allowing myself and countless others to die for his own gain. Johnson's face grew stern. Had he been truly loyal, he would have quickly rejected those temptations and taken action to save those lost to the Soroshi and the rebellion before it even began. And yet you rewarded his reaffirmation by banishing him from your sight. Celestia turned her full attention to Johnson. At his weakest, you betrayed him to his darkest desires and sowed the seeds of rebellion in his mind. Do not blame me for his betrayal, Johnson snapped. I was fighting the Imperium's wars, trying to serve and save the man you claim to be. And you could not even be bothered to see if your greatest friend was still the man you knew him as? Even a simple message would be enough to assure his loyalty, but you allowed your arrogance and your woundedness cloud your judgment. Johnson's composure fell away completely. You have no right to judge me for his actions. Yes, I do. Celestia's glare intensified. I asked much of you and your fellow Primarchs during the Crusade. I asked you to be my greatest warriors, the face of the Imperium against the tides of Xenos and traitors. How foolish I was, now that I see that my actions only encouraged doubt and mistrust among brothers and friends. She closed her eyes. But then, while my selfish desires may have fostered resentment, it was not my command that you banish Luther to Caliban, where his betrayal could grow more substantial. Silence, Johnson bellowed. You are twisting words against me. You are a traitor in the guise of a benevolent ruler, and you are not the emperor of mankind. If that is your judgment, Celestia said. Go on then, and make it so. Celestia closed her eyes, not watching as Johnson drew his sword and swung at her head. All she did was shift her energy ever slightly, even as the presence of the Watchers and other psychic wards strained against her. It was just enough to not only shatter the sword, but to send the lion staggering back several feet from both the shockwave and surprise. The Watchers barely flinched, and Celestia did not bother to extend her presence to the Terminators or their prisoner. She allowed the silence to linger for several moments before she opened her eyes, noting that while Johnson's composure remained, she could see small traces of surprise and even doubt among his eyes. Look at me, Johnson, she said, stepping towards the Primarch. Look into my eyes and tell me what you see? Are they the eyes of a liar, of a demon wearing a pretty face to deceive the First Legion? Are they the eyes of a mere mortal, hoping to beguile themselves into your good graces? Or are they the same eyes you looked into when I first met you on Caliban? Are they the eyes of the ruler whose vision has rotted away over the course of 15,000 years? Johnson said nothing, Celestia's vision narrowing. Tell me, Johnson, are they the eyes of your emperor, or are they not? Johnson remained silent, matching Celestia's glare with his own. The prisoner still muttered away, but both Primarch and Empress ignored him for now. Finally, Johnson spoke, though the tightness of his jaw indicated he was not fully convinced of what he was saying. Yes. Yes, they are. Good. Celestia allowed her gaze to soften. I know that I still have much to do to convince you fully, but at least I have gained your trust for now. Johnson said nothing. He was humoring her, perhaps, but it was a better step forward than nothing. Now, to the matter of your prisoner. I have no need for him, Johnson said. Do with him as you wish. Rather callous for your former mentor, do you think? Celestia asked. Johnson did not reply, instead watching as Celestia crossed to the prisoner and knelt. The Watchers followed her, though they did not close to her as they had when she had first arrived, still silently observing all Celestia did. The darkness of chaos swells around those who see themselves loyal, Luther babbled, not even noticing as Celestia knelt before him. Absolution comes for the guiltiest, it comes from she, the Emperor changed but in the flesh. So it has. Celestia placed a hand on Luther's forehead. Tsar Luther of Caliban, I find your sins laid bare. Now, I release you, be at peace. With a single pulse of psychic energy, Luther's head snapped back, the fallen Marine's eyes growing pale as his body crumpled to the floor. There was a lengthy pause before Celestia rose. It is done, she said. Now, there is more work to do. Chapter 1.24, Mentoring Research. Nearly a full day had passed since the Empress had departed for the Rock. The Dark Angel fleet remained in orbit just out of reach of the Crusade fleet and Caesarea's planetary defense batteries, holding a tight picket around the Rock. New forces summoned to the Empress banner had arrived, some bringing new troops to the battlefield below while others took up places in the line of battle. All that remained was for the other side to make the first move. Korax watched the Dark Angel fleet from the bridge of the Empress flagship. Outside of their general patrols and a few smaller craft darting in and out to test the Crusade's resolve, the opposing fleet remained motionless. Fortunately, the Crusade fleet had not risen to take the bait, But with the Empress' departure and the Minotaurs having moved their strength back to the fleet, there was no knowing how long before the more impulsive captains grew tired of waiting. Lord Corax turned as one of the bridge officers approached. "Pardon the intrusion, my lord, but Lady Terra has asked to speak with you." "Did she say why?" Corax asked. He had a good idea of what the young psyker wanted, but there was nothing wrong about obtaining information to better solidify his position. "She did not say much, my lord," the officer said. "She seemed concerned, for a lack of a better term. Perhaps it is mere worry for the Empress and her return." Perhaps there was a pause. "Send her in." The officer bowed and walked off, leaving Corax alone once more as he watched the fleets. Perhaps it was worry, but there was plenty the girl dealt with that could have drawn her to the Primarch. It was just up to her to divulge that information, and Corax to use it for the Imperium's advantage. He heard uncertain steps behind him, turning his eye slightly to see Terra approaching. She was dressed in the light purple armor the Empress had crafted for her, a slight glow following her from the residual psychic powers traveling through the Amor. She stood in a loose stance, her hands tucked away at her sides as he looked at Corax. "You wish to speak with me, young Terra?" he asked, keeping his focus on the fleet. "You weren't in your quarters when I checked, so I figured you would be here," Terra replied. Corax said nothing as Terra continued. "I just wanted to see how you were doing with the Empress gone." "I do not require constant watching, Terra," Corax replied. "If anything, I would believe you would be more concerned with your own well-being after your actions on Caesarea." "I've been dealing with that in my own time." Corax could sense a small wavering in Terra's voice. "The sisters have been help, with their training and all. Even what is assumed as beneficial leaves some threats hidden," Corax replied. "Discipline can only be maintained for so long when zealotry is brought in to complicate the mind." "I like to think I've managed," Terra countered. There was a pause before Terra spoke again. "But then others haven't been so lucky, or else we wouldn't be in a standoff like this. The seeds of what we see here were planted 15,000 years ago, Terra," Corax said. "Conflict with other factions of the Imperium is to be expected as the Empress brings more under her power." "I suppose things were different back when you were first fighting for the Imperium then?" Corax gave her a glance as she backtracked. "Sorry, I know how sensitive you are about the past. It is nothing too personal, and you are not wholly wrong." Corax looked back to the Dark Angel fleet. "My brothers and I had our squabbles, even before Horus' fall and the heresy. It is only natural when one considers how each of us were raised with different ideas of war and statesmanship. A few months ago I could have given you an entire lecture on how difference make us stronger, and that by looking to our own faults we can become stronger together." Terra shrugged. "Then I remind myself that sometimes the Imperium doesn't want to hear what I have to say, so I won't bore you with it." Corax turned his head fully towards Terra. "Bitterness," he said. "It drips from your words like dew. Has the Imperium truly broken you to the point where you do nothing to change it?" "I am trying to change it," Terra shot back. "Just not in the ways I'm used to, that's all. The sisters listen to me like I'm some kind of holy person. Matthias has been too busy with the war, the Empress." Terra made a vague gesture towards the Dark Angels. "That just leaves you, and you're more content to be alone, so I've had to improvise a little." "No doubt." Corax looked away again. "You drift closer and closer towards the broken shells that have populated this realm since the fall. A pity that one so innocent is twisted into the very thing they despise." "Don't think just because I'm frustrated I've given in," Terra countered. "Think about your own experiences. When you're faced with an obstacle, you adapt and overcome, trying to find new ways to go about in your attacks against your enemies. Just think of it like that, but on a smaller scale. And have you had any success in this endeavor? I've gotten you to talk more in the last minute than you have since I first met you." Corax remained silent for several moments, trying to think of a proper response to the girl. The fate of the Imperium rested in the balance, and she considered mere talk to be a sign of success. "But then, such simple matters are what keep humanity strong, are they not? I suppose that is why you sought me out today?" he asked. "Well, yes," she replied. "I knew you were upset that the Empress did not allow you to accompany her on her mission to the Dark Angels, so I wanted to see what you were doing and if there was anything I could do to help. I appreciate your concern, but I do not believe that a counselor is what I need at this point." "Believe me, you're not the first person who's said no when I only want to talk with them," Terra shrugged. "That, at least, I have some experience with, otherwise you'd still be hiding out in that cave while the rest of the galaxy moved on without you." "Of course." Corax shifted slightly. "If there is nothing else you wish to discuss, I have other matters to attend to." "Besides staring out the window and waiting for the Dark Angels to do something?" Hera asked. Korax could see her drawing closer, gently placing a hand against his arm. I'm not the only one that needs to worry about the Imperium breaking them down to a broken shell, Korax. You've been through so much more than I ever will. I just want to help, whoever I can and however I can. Korax paused again. The temptation to rebuff the girl, to give some pleasantry to set her mind at ease, gnawed at the Primarch's mind. But then this was also the girl that had led him towards a brighter path, away from constant seclusion and suffering. I thank you, Terra, for your concern. Korax looked to Terra. Truly, I do. I am perhaps not the fragile figure that you think I am, but seeing one such as you having concern for the others around them, it is welcome. Korax looked towards the rock. There are others that do not seem to share such concerns. You're not still angry at the Empress for not allowing you to join her on the mission, are you? Hera asked. You make it seem like it is some petty slight that is driving our forces apart. Korax replied. The Empress is powerful, but she is no god. There are times I wonder whether she remembers that fact when taking on these tasks. Believe me, you're not the only one that has worries like that, Terra said. But then would she be who she is if we were always worrying about her, second-guessing her decisions every chance we had? Korax said nothing. I know you've had a lot to think about, and I know you still believe that you have to prove yourself to the Empress for her to accept you, but you don't have to punish yourself like this. You are not alone anymore. Silence reigned on the bridge for several moments, Korax mulling over Terra's assurances. Finally, the woman began to draw away. I see you're still focused on your duties, she said. Just let me know if there's anything else I can do. She turned to leave before Korax spoke again. Stay, he said. If you have no other duties, stay here with me. Perhaps, with your presence, we might continue to keep a level head about our forces, and perhaps you might learn something in regards to commanding troops. Oh, Terra shuffled her feet for a moment. Uncertainty perhaps, but Korax could detect more than a bit of surprise that her attempt at reaching him had produced some fruit. Though how long before you are further broken down remains to be seen. I would be glad to. Terra stepped back, taking a spot next to Korax before speaking again. So, what exactly do you see from up here? I don't just mean physically, but tactically. It is all a matter of misdirection, Korax began, breaking down the intricacies of the Dark Angel's deployment such that Terra could understand. It would keep the student occupied for a while, perhaps even allow her to bring a little more perspective into her mission to help others. And, as much as Korax would hate to admit it, perhaps allow a little more lost humanity to return to him. Twilight set aside the latest tome in her research and gave a stretch. She had taken a day off from her training with the sister and her discussions with Korax to read more, and after several hours of study she was reminded once more that among many things the Imperium did not approve of, comfortable libraries were one of them. She marked her place in her book and stood, turning towards the door and stepping back out in the hall. Sister Veronica had joined her, waiting patiently outside the room Twilight had chosen as a study while she read. She did not participate in the reading herself, content to stand guard and watch while Twilight delved deeper into her research. Not that Twilight did not try to engage her, and had managed some success at times, but the sisters still seemed more content to watch and observe. No doubt to make up for what had happened on Caesarea, but that was in the past. All that remained was to move on. I need to move around a bit more, she said. Mind joining me for a quick walk? Of course, Terra. Veronica nodded, falling in step next to Twilight. I trust your research is going well? Well as ever, I suppose, Twilight said, giving a shrug. It's a bit dense at times, and other times I feel like I'm reading the same praises to the Empress I'd read 2 minutes ago, but it's still quite fascinating. I am sure. There was a pause before Veronica continued. I know that I have been a bit hesitant to join you in your studies, but I have been meaning to ask, well, my sisters have been meaning to ask, really, what is it that you are reading about beyond scripture and military treatises? I have been trying to brush up on history, really, Twilight said. Anything about the early Imperium, Korax, the Lion, all information like that. Isn't that forbidden? Not if you're the Empress' personal student, I suppose. Twilight gave a small sigh. And it's not like they would have to worry too much because there's barely anything there. All I find are bits and pieces of information that are so bogged down in mysticism and other superstition that I can barely get anything out that I didn't already know. Twilight looked at Veronica. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that time, would you? Just what they taught us through sermons and scripture, Veronica said. The galaxy was an untamed and dangerous world until the light of the Emperor was imparted upon them. That light was darkened when traitors and heretics rose up against the Imperium, and it is our task to bring them to task and return that light to mankind once more. The Primarch were chosen servants of the Emperor, The physical embodiment of his will, his power. The sister hesitated for a moment before chuckling. Though seeing the Empress' own power, I think the old preachers might have been selling her a bit short in their tales. Probably. Either that or over-exaggerating, but Twilight dared not challenge the sister's idea of Celestia's divinity. Sorry if that is not what you are looking for, Veronica said. I wish I had more to offer, but I am not sure if our knowledge is exactly what you need if you are researching history. It has its place, Twilight countered. To know how faiths and legends develop, to see how they have shaped you and your ways of life, that is just another part of the story that a lot of people tend to overlook. You said it yourself, the Empress is grander in person than she is in the old stories, but the old stories did have a place in developing our ideas of her. I suppose you're right. You're still welcome to join me if you want, Twilight said, giving the sister a smile. You can see for yourself how things have changed, and maybe help me find some of the older information I've been looking for. I know not everyone can stay focused on research like I can, but it's always nice to have a study buddy now and again. Study buddy? Veronica asked, giving Twilight an odd look. I cannot say I am familiar with that term. Right, why would they know what that is? It's a learning companion. Someone to bounce ideas off of and such, to get research done faster, Twilight said. Oh, I see. Veronica nodded. Sorry, some of your more casual expressions are a bit unusual. I think only Judith can understand all that you say at times. You'll pick it up in time, Twilight said. I find it's a nice way to break away from some of the grimness around here. No offense, but you all are a bit too serious at times. It is merely the reality that we deal with, Veronica replied. You have seen for yourself what this galaxy has to offer. There is little room for joy when surrounded on all sides by terrors. Yes, Twilight looked away for a moment. But I also know what it's like when you allow yourself to fall into despair and feel that nothing you can do will make a difference. All it takes is a reminder of the strength you have within yourself, with your friends and family, and you can rise back up from that pit. I suppose. Now it was Veronica's turn to look away, Twilight watching the sister from the corner of her eye. Apologies, we were often told that hope is a dangerous thing, something that can lead to unfathomable betrayal if we rely on it too much. But having no hope at all is no better. Why else would you or anyone else here still fight without some kind of hope? Veronica did not appear to have an answer for this, so Twilight continued. You know why I'm trying to find all that information we talked about, right? To better help the Imperium, of course. Veronica replied quickly. Not just the Imperium, but Corax, the Empress, you and your sisters, everyone. Twilight turned her attention forward as she continued. I haven't been here for very long, but I've been here long enough to see that you all both shun and obsess over the past, all those failures and miscalculations. I figured that if I could understand a little of this, I don't know, masochistic pride? Martyrdom culture? Whatever it is, if I understand why you all think this way, maybe then I might be able to help you all better understand yourselves. She paused as she thought over her next words. And maybe help you actually make victories last and feel more meaningful, instead of having every single thing be seen as leading to inevitable doom. Veronica was silent, her jaw working as she tried to think of an answer for Twilight. Twilight allowed her a few more moments before speaking again. I know, it's not really that well thought out, but it's better than just standing by and watching you all beat yourselves up before you even go out to battle. No, it's Veronica started. Well, perhaps it is a bit silly, but it is a noble goal to be sure. If there is anything I can do to spread this message, please tell me. I am sure my sisters as well would be more than willing to help. I'd really appreciate that, Twilight said, giving Veronica another smile. Now, let's get back to studying. I want to have at least some idea of what we're getting into before the Empress returns. Chapter 1.25, Gods and Students. Celestia stood in the main entrance to the shuttle, waiting as they docked back with her flagship. Communications with the flagship had been limited while in transit, but what messages she could relay were more than enough to prepare the way before them. All that remained was to gauge the next steps of the crusade, and how the Lion would serve in the conditions of the new Imperium. As they had gotten past thinly veiled challenges, Celestia's optimism was higher than normal. She did not turn as the Lion and his entourage stepped up behind her. She could feel discomfort positively radiating from the group, no doubt from the ever-analytical Primarch preparing for whatever threats awaited them. This is another test, is it not? The Lion said. Only if you choose to make it such, Celestia replied. I do not wish to repeat the mistakes of old, Johnson. If you feel doubts or concerns about my presentation, do not allow them to fester as they had before the heresy. I am most likely not the one who needs to hear such words, but I understand. His tone indicated everything but, but Celestia fell silent again as the door before her swung open. A collection of custodes awaited her, their gaze unbroken as Celestia, the lion, and the dark angel stepped aboard. "Welcome back, Empress," the leader of the custodes said. "Lord Corax and Lady Terra are awaiting you in the command room, per your orders." "Good." Celestia nodded. "Send word to all forces not currently committed to pacification of Caesarea to prepare for warp transit. Further orders will be forthcoming." The custodes nodded, disappearing into the group while the others led Celestia and her group onward. "Who is this Terra you speak of?" the lion asked from behind Celestia. "A student, for lack of a better term." Celestia replied. "She has accompanied me on my journeys since my resurrection, and has proven to be quite adept at understanding the mechanics and strengths of the Imperium. With all due respect, I do not see the benefit of bringing a child into these discussions, no matter how adept they may be. Sometimes it takes a child's perspective to win a war." Celestia countered. The lion said nothing, but Celestia could feel that he was unconvinced. In time, she thought, so Twilight may show the Imperium all she is capable of. Their walk passed in silence, Celestia keeping her eyes forward while the dark angels took in the situation around them. She allowed herself a bit of freedom, reaching out to touch the minds of those aboard the ship. A general wave of relief had passed now that she had returned to the battleship, though lingering thoughts of dread would still remain, as they always did. She recalled her soul, turning her thoughts inward as she worked out the next steps in her mission. The command room was situated just below the main bridge, a large room dominated by computers and maps projecting the Imperium and beyond. The custodes fanned out as Celestia and the Dark Angels entered the room, Primarch and Empress crossing quickly to the main display. Corax stood off to her right, the shadows clinging to him even in the light of the display, while Twilight and Inquisitor Matthias stood more or less in front of her, Twilight giving Celestia a warm smile as she entered. "It's so good to see you've returned safely, Empress," Twilight said as Celestia approached. "The pleasure is all mine," Celestia said before stepping slightly to the side to draw attention to the lion. "I present before the generals of this crusade and the Imperium Lionel Janssen, Primarch of the Dark Angels. Let it be known by all present that he possesses the same power and authority as I in all matters I cannot attend to, as with Lord Corax." "So, you are the Empress student," Janssen said, ignoring Celestia for a moment as he focused on Twilight. For her part the younger woman did not budge, though her smile did drop away from mere friendly professionalism. "My name is Terra," she said, giving a respectful nod. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you in person, Lord Janssen." The lion regarded Twilight for a few moments before he gave a short grunt, turning his attention now to Corax. "My sources had thought you dead, Corax," he said. "I am surprised it took you this long to resurface again." "We all have our reasons for remaining in the shadows," Corax replied, his face neutral. A potential barb if there was ever, but Janssen did not seem willing to rise to the bait just yet. Celestia seized on the opportunity to begin the discussion of their plans, if nothing more than to keep the Primarchs focused on the Imperium and not on potential bickering. "With the arrival of the Dark Angels, the path for our crusade has branched considerably." Celestia moved so she could see all parties around the display. "Our enemies remain around us, but now we truly have the strength to strike them. The question that I present to you is where we make our next thrust. The northern and southern borders are practically unguarded," the lion said after a brief scan of the map. "And if your general press towards the east is telling of your intended grand strategy, it may yet pull more forces away from such positions as you march for Ultramar. Fortunately, simple delegation should be more than enough to shore up our lines before your power is gathered, and fortunately there is now enough of our number for such delegation to be completed. For that, the Dark Angels will secure your flanks while you prepare for your next advance. Wouldn't it make more sense to not split up our forces so soon after your return?" Twilight offered, but the Primarch ignored her. "My sons were diligent enough to assemble 14,000 of their number to my banner, with supporting forces that eclipse even their host. No doubt more remain from Guilliman's meddling, but that is merely a matter of logistics. The First Legion will be more than ample at turning back the decay that appears to be standard among the Imperium in this age." The lion cast a glance over to Twilight, Celestia noting the young woman's look of displeasure. "I am glad to see that we have gotten these pleasantries out of the way. I go now to assume my command." "I do not believe the Empress called us here merely to declare you War Master, Janssen," Corax said, folding his arms across his chest. "Or have you forgotten the last time one of our number took power based on mere assumptions? Guilliman was easy to correct, especially once Sanguinius arrived and the warp cleared." Janssen replied. "And I did not ask for the position," but given the circumstances and the forces we possess, it is only logical that we separate to cover the most ground. But you've only been here for, what, a few weeks? And when you arrived you threatened to kill us all. Twilight started. That doesn't really instill confidence in those you are looking to lead. Again, Johnson ignored Twilight, though Celestia could see annoyance cross his features. The only thing that matters now is that we do not lose the momentum of your victory here, he said. So do we waste our time arguing, or do we take action and begin to move against the enemies of mankind? No offense, but maybe you're just rushing into this a little too quickly? Twilight spoke again. 1 minute you're here, next minute you're not. It really doesn't add a whole lot to unity of the crusade if we operate like that. We're trying to unite the Imperium once again, and as much as it might seem contrary, we'll do much better as a team rather than going off on our own. Do not think I've come only to sow dissension, student, Johnson said, his composure finally breaking enough for him to glare at Twilight. I speak merely on my tactical and strategic assessment of the situation before us, nothing more. Or do you have an alternate solution that doesn't risk drawing away forces from front where greenskins, chaos, and other threats can assault at their pleasure? Silence. Celestia called, drawing all attention back to her. Terra is right that unity among us all will do better for the Imperium. Bickering over grand strategy will only delay our eventual action. She then looked to the Lion. But your comments are not unwarranted. The force we possess here is by no means weak, but as more troops are called under my direct control, it will mean other sectors of the Imperium will be left wanting. Celestia moved away from the table, keeping her back to the others. I still intend to make for Ultramar, as the scions of Guilliman will only bolster our strength further, but the Imperium at large still needs our help. Even with my power, I am still one person hoping to regain the loyalty of an entire galaxy. A pause before Celestia turned back. I had it in my mind to branch the crusade, myself leading the main force while others take on the task of securing the rest of the Imperium. With the arrival of the Dark Angels, I finally have the leadership necessary to do so. The question though is which of you two will be leading the charge. Both Primarchs cast a glance to one another. Is this doubt I sense between you? She asked. I would not classify it solely as doubt, Empress. Corax started. For my own part, there is some trepidation as to the last time you entrusted such responsibilities to one man. Come now, Corax, this is far from the follies of the Great Crusade. Johnson countered. By Corax's frown, that was not what the Lord of the Raven Guard meant. That being said, there is little time to dawdle on the decision. Whom do you name to lead your armies? Celestia paused again. There was a tremor just beyond her field of perception, causing her to draw her hand to her forehead. She turned away for a moment, just long enough to clear her mind and think of her next words. In truth, I have not decided yet, Celestia said finally. The Lion's forces are more complete, but Corax has served the longest at my side during the crusade and is thus familiar with the soldiers under my command. Both of you would make fine commanders for the second branch of the crusade. I do not doubt Corax's skills, the Lion said. A master tactician and fine warrior, to be sure. But lurking in the shadows and striking against weak foes is not the message that we must send to our enemies. We must be more aggressive, truly taking the fight to our enemies to ensure mankind's dominance among the stars. Give me a few days, and I will have a strategy plan for your second front. Johnson looked back at the map. The Maelstrom, for instance, is a reasonable target, and it would draw in the sons of Jagatai for our cause as well. If of course they listen to you when you drop out of the blue with a massive battle fleet, Twilight said. Johnson's mood seemed to sour again. I am many things, student, but stupid is not one of them. Of course the forces around the Maelstrom will be contacted first. It is a basic practice to ensure that you have full support before starting a campaign. He looked to Twilight. Are you afraid that I might offend the delicate sensibilities of the White Scars? No, but even with the authority of a Primarch you need to work to make sure that other soldiers are going to listen to you. Twilight countered. Half the problems with this place is that no one really cares to listen to one another and work together, something which apparently hasn't been fixed in almost 15,000 years. If we can have a plan where we're all working towards a known goal instead of just jumping into fights at random, then the crusade will go much better and we wouldn't have to worry about butting heads all the time. I do not need to take lessons in military strategy from a child. The Lion snapped, Twilight drawing away as the Primarch looked to Celestia. Apologies, Empress. I merely wished to see this crusade brought to a successful and swift conclusion. I understand your passion, Johnson. Celestia frowned. Though it does seem that our circumstances have worn down some of our composure, has it not? I will take all of your suggestions into account as I plan the next stage of the campaign. Understandable. Johnson drew back. I shall return to the rock to await your decision. Corax. He gave the Primarch of the Raven Guard a curt nod, brushing past Twilight again on his way out. Celestia waited for the lion to depart before speaking again. Terra, I will speak with you later on a few matters. For now, I would like to speak with Corax alone. As you wish, Empress. Twilight's worry was palpable, but a few quick words and some reassurance would do her well in time. As Twilight and Matthias exited, Celestia turned her attention now to Corax. I see the lion has changed little since the crusade, he said finally. A bit more confrontational, but this is a new environment for him. Celestia rested her palms against the display. In time, he will turn such confrontation into purpose, and the Dark Angels will supplement the rest of the crusade nicely. You don't intend on turning him loose, as he suggested? As I said, in time. Celestia looked back up to Corax. It is not just for my benefit to have Johnson on a short leash, Corax. I failed you and the others by not saying more of what I had planned for the Imperium, leaving doubts in their minds as to if I was truly acting in the best interests of mankind. I shall not make that same mistake again. I realize that, but do the rest of your subordinates realize that? Corax asked. For all our sakes, I hope so. Celestia paused again as the tremor returned. Corax cocked his head to one side before speaking again. More trouble? He asked. You were not exactly subtle the first time you felt a disturbance. And fortunately none of you mentioned it. Celestia replied. I do not know what it is. The Chaos Gods rearing their heads to taunt me? Interference from the hive mind? Something worse? I can decipher what it is with a little time and focus, but the lion was not wrong when saying that time is a resource we are in short supply of. Perhaps Terra might be of some assistance? Corax offered. The girl has quite a gift for insight, even if her naivete holds her back. Perhaps Celestia pondered the thought. It would give Twilight a chance to expand her powers, perhaps acclimate to the process of divination through the warp, and perhaps give Twilight a chance to open up a little more about recent developments. Why not? I have time as I plan out the campaign, and Terra could always use more counseling. She looked to one custodes that stood guard. Please bring Lady Terra back in. The custodes said nothing, turning towards the door and stepping outside. It was not long before he returned, straightening up before speaking. Lady Terra is not in the hall, the custodes said. Those guarding the door said she and the Inquisitor were called away on urgent business. The tremor returned, and Celestia understood. Rebecca made her way down the hall, eyes darting from room to room as she searched for her quarry. She assumed that they would be within the mess hall, as usual when they were not in the training room or under order, but the Inquisitor's henchmen were proving to be more difficult to find than she had anticipated. Perhaps you should wait until Lord Matthias and Lady Terra return. Veronica offered from behind her. Then, when we are all together, you can settle this without much effort. I had thought of that, but I don't know, it feels improper. Rebecca shook her head. Terra would understand, but I do not feel the need to bring the Inquisitor himself into the discussion. Much in the same way Sister Naomi doesn't trust him? It's not mistrust. Rebecca shook her head. Just impropriety. Veronica didn't say anything, but Rebecca knew her sister well enough to sense she was not convinced. Still, I suppose it would be better than trying to explain this to Judith or Ruth. Finally the two sisters reached their destination, stepping into the mess hall and looking for their quarry. They did not have to look far. The blue greatcoats of the Valhallans stood out among the drab uniforms and armor of the standard Imperial military. Sister Bianca and the Psyker were also there, the Valhallans chatting with the Hospitaller as the latter kept a restraining hand on Angelique. Rebecca took a deep breath before starting towards them, Veronica in tow. Oh, Sister Rebecca, Bianca called to them as they approached. What a pleasant surprise, we do not see you very much in this part of the ship. It never really came up in our wanderings, Rebecca said. And with the Inquisitor coming to and fro, I suppose we never had a chance to interact beyond training sessions. Well, seeing as Lord Matthias and Lady Terra are preoccupied, you are always welcome to join us, said one of the Valhallans, Alexis if Rebecca remembered correctly. Rebecca nodded her thanks as she and Veronica took their seats at the table, the Valhallans pulling away some half-eaten food to give the sisters more room. 5 petals descend from the flower, Angelique mumbled. The light vanishes and the mare is left to call through the void. We understand, Angelique, Bianca said, gently stroking the Psyker's back. But we are safe here, for now. No need to worry about such drastic times. The pillar stands above the flower, bathing with shadow and light. Angelique replied. Do you understand what she's saying? Rebecca asked. Not always, Bianca said with a sigh. But there are moments when I think maybe Just for a minute, she might speak plainly again. She only really does that when she's telling you how you're going to die. Alexis added, drawing a glare from Bianca and Nikolai. What? It's true. The flower wilts from time and age, with no mare to snip the buds away, Angelique said, looking toward Rebecca. Do you step forward to guide the little lights? I might think so. Rebecca shuffled in her seat a little. That is why I came to seek you out, Sister Bianca. Oh? Bianca asked. Considering taking up the vows of a Hospitaller? Well, not exactly, Veronica shook her head. I do feel I can assist in such matters, but I am still drawn to my squad and my sisters. They have been like family to me. In more ways than one. Veronica added. And while I would love to take the vow of a Hospitaller, I could not leave them entirely to pursue such actions. I understand completely. Bianca nodded. It was difficult for me leaving behind many of my connections to the Argent Shroud, and there were times when those connections almost drew me away from the path of Hospitaller. She smiled before continuing. But if you are still willing to learn, there are several healing techniques I can teach you to help you along the way, and I'm sure you should have no trouble procuring some medical supplies for the future. Oh, thank you. Rebecca nodded. It really means a lot to me to have this opportunity, sister. But of course. Bianca looked to Veronica. And you? Do you wish to learn a little healing to aid your sister? Healing is not really my area of focus when it comes to service beyond battle. Veronica replied. I am perfectly fine with what little I know for now. Nikolai shifted slightly, drawing Rebecca's attention. Is something the matter? She asked. Nothing, truly. Alexis started. Just a number of the men we served along before coming into Lord Matthias' services thought much the same. They didn't live long enough to change their minds. I lost several sisters in much the same way, Bianca said, lowering her head. All the more reason why I became a Hospitaller. A silence fell over the table, sisters and Valhallans not willing to talk as old memories returned. Finally the silence was broken by Rebecca speaking. Well, I suppose I have much to learn, she said. I promise you all, I will not let you down. I have no doubts, Bianca said. A whimper from Angelique drew the attention of those at the table. I suppose Angelique is as good a patient as any to practice on. If you are to serve as my apprentice, you must learn to read her and her moods to best direct and comfort her when I am unable, not just setting bones and stitching wounds. The flower brushes but does not see, for the mare's truth is great, Angelique mumbled. Hope you have a head for prophecy too, Alexis said as Rebecca pulled closer. It grows on you, but it's not like her chirping phase. Chirping phase? Veronica asked. Apparently Angelique went through a phase where she communicated in chirps, before she became my charge, Bianca said. Did you once tell me you tried to pass her off as a noblewoman during that time? Ah, hey Alexis pulled away, tugging at his collar slightly. I'll let you two discuss Angelique for now. Bianca rolled her eyes as she and Rebecca focused on Angelique. She seems fragile, scared Rebecca thought. How am I supposed to reach her if she barely knows who I am? Angelique, can you hear me? Rebecca started, reaching a hand towards the psyker. I'm going to be helping you with Sister Bianca. Would you like that? A vine creeps up the side of the pillar, Angelique said, turning her attention to Rebecca. A second petal, fluttering under the wings of the mare. Petals guide the lost, do they not? You're making a connection, good, Bianca said. Be gentle, though. Too much stimuli may cause her to react adversely. She won't lash out, will she? Rebecca asked. I don't want either of us to get hurt. Angelique's talents lie in divination rather than brute strength. But should things get out of hand, I will be here to help. Bianca gave a small nod towards Angelique. Go on. You are doing well. Rebecca swallowed before reaching out to Angelique. Angelique, tell me a little more about the mare, Rebecca offered. The mare watches, the mare was broken. Angelique gave a small smile. But the eye and the flower brought the mare back. All is well and the mare strikes with the light. Rebecca allowed herself a smile as well. Reaching out to Angelique still made little sense, but now she felt she could see what Bianca saw, a young woman trying to make sense of the world, shattered as her vision was. Perhaps this was what Tara saw when she reached out to others. Rebecca's hand brushed gently against Angelique's before the psyker pulled back, her face contorting with worry. No, Angelique said. No. Did I do something wrong? Rebecca asked, snapping her vision towards Bianca. I had only meant to comfort her. This isn't you, Bianca said, her face growing stony. This is something more. Nikolai, go and find Lord Matthias. The Valhallan said nothing as he pushed away from the table and stood. I'll go with you, Veronica said, rising as Angelique cried out in fear. They come through the void, she said, tears forming at the edge of her vision. They come as one, and yet swarm like the tide. I can hear them, thousands of them calling for me, shrieking as the darkness covers all. The light is blind, the mare is lost, the raven stands alone with the darkness. Angelique, it's okay, Bianca moved over the psyker, steadying her with her hands. The visions mean nothing. Think of what Lady Terra said, let your mind clear and let them pass. This did little to placate Angelique. They are coming, she cried. The great devourer rises from the depths to strike the light. The mare and the lion stand, but the darkness claims all. Light fails and the raven is blinded, and the spark is cast among the waves. She struggled free of Bianca, curling up into a ball as the Hospitaller and Rebecca tried to calm her. The Tyranids are coming. The Tyranids are coming. End of part 1.